Welcome to this chapter of the Sustainability COP26 Learning Hub. I'm joined today by Veronica Broomes. Veronica is a sustainability consultant and she's also a business owner and entrepreneur herself. And what we're going to be covering today is what does net zero mean for small businesses? So welcome, Veronica. We've been having a chat with some small businesses ourselves, and we've actually got a couple of questions here. So I was wondering if we could have a quick chat to find out a little bit more. So if you're happy, I can start with the first question.
Yes, please. Go ahead, Emma. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this chat.
My pleasure. So the first question we've got as a really good starting ground is, what is a net zero and how is it relevant to climate change?
Thanks for combining that, because it's a natural discussion, I think. So net zero is, as the term suggests, it has to do with zero and it's a net. And in this instance, it actually refers to carbon, so carbon emissions. So all big business activities will have some amount of energy associated with what they do. And that could mean that that energy is coming from the use of fossil fuel in heating or gas or even travel or even the stationery that we buy. And so what this net zero refers to is that the amount of those carbon emissions that are coming out of our activities should not be more than the amount of carbon emission that is being saved or stored. So it means that by having that balance, you're not emitting more than you're actually saving or storing. And the link with climate change is because carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide are all gases that are emerging or emerge or process from the activities of us humans on the planet. And when these gases go into the atmosphere, they cause a rise in the temperature of the atmosphere. And that increase in temperature is what leads to the term, or what has led to the change in the climate caused by human-induced activities that as a result of temperature increases. So that's my response to your question about what is net zero and how is it relevant to climate change. And do let me know if you'd like me to add anything or you're okay with that. I'll now simply send a message in the chat, Stephanie. And if you are seeing it, then please do let me know.
That's brilliant. Actually, it links on quite nicely to the next question. So people have said years ago it was a lot about like keywords like global warming and climate change, and then it kind of went all into reducing carbon emissions, and now there's a lot of talk about targets for net zero and that race to net zero. Some people might find that kind of language and the change of it quite confusing. What does all that mean for small businesses?
You're right about that confusion, because in my discussions with businesses, small business owners, through some of the business support agencies in the UK, it is part of what I address, this dealing with some of the confusing terminology as well as debunking some of the myths. Now, yes, a few years ago, there was a net zero that was under the discussion, but as part of the commitments of governments around the world to seek to come to terms or to grapple with this urgent situation of climate change and the heating in some parts of the world, the rising sea level, they've recognized that if they can aim for that balance in net zero, and as I explained in the previous question, it means that they're on their way to helping businesses to have a target that they can work towards or they can aim towards. And now that the discussion is about race to net zero, that's actually an initiative that is linked with the International Panel on Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this is saying that this is a race in the sense that is suggesting urgency and therefore we need to be taking action. It's actually a campaign that is called Race to Net Zero. But I think business owners should not get confused by the terminology. Just look for what it is that it will mean to you as a business. So, for example, if it's speaking about the campaign to net zero, it's more or less suggesting or inviting you to sign up to that campaign, to be part of the group of businesses and individuals around the world that will want to reduce your carbon emissions and therefore contribute to this global target of not exceeding a 1.5 degree increase in temperature by 2050.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Veronica. Also, we've asked, small businesses have asked, as small business owners, why should they pay attention to discussions about net zero now? Obviously, there's a lot of policy and stuff that's coming in for larger businesses, but why is it important for the smaller businesses?
I would say the smaller businesses have two main reasons for the relevance to be, or to highlight the relevance. One reason is that as a business, in order to stay in business, you need to be looking at the sustainability pillars, and an integral part of sustainability is the environment. So sustainability looks at your economic, your social, the environmental. Another way of saying it, it looks at your profits, it looks at the social, being your people, whether in your workplace or your suppliers or your customers, and it also looks at the environment, be it the planet. So in essence, you're saying that if sustainability has those three pillars, and one is the environment, and this is linked with net zero and climate change, as a business, I need to understand the risks and the implications for my business. Now, the other part of it has to do with the external environment. So, for example, you mentioned legislation, Emma, and that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect would be procurement. If you're in the supply chain of a larger company, because they have commitments to meet, it means that they'll be looking and auditing their supply chains to understand what their supply chain partners are doing in respect of their carbon emissions. And the other aspect is, of course, to attract and retain talent, because many studies have shown that the so-called Generation Z or Generation Z, depending on which part of the world you are people who value and take seriously the aspects of the environment as well as sustainability. And integral to the environment is climate change. And therefore, if you as a business demonstrate that you too are taking this seriously, they're more likely to want to work with you. They may be considering, well, maybe I too can contribute by reducing my carbon emissions from travel. And if you offer that as an option in your business, it means you're in a better position, you're well placed to be able to attract the highest level of skills and talent to your business, as well as retain such talent and skills.
That's a really good point, Veronica. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions here that are from actual specific businesses. So, for example, a startup business, I work from home, and what I do is I sell stuff online. I use the internet and e-commerce stores / platforms. Would net zero apply to me also?
Yes, is the one-word answer. And the explanation is that it applies to you because you work from home as a business. The business owner also mentioned the fact that, yes, there's e-commerce or online platforms related to their business. And whether it's products they're selling or services, they will be using electricity or the internet or a computer or appliances that require electricity as part of their business. This means that the electricity supplier would be relevant. So is your electricity supplier a company that invests in renewable energy and therefore tells you that X percentage of the energy that you are paying for comes from renewable sources? Or is your energy supplier primarily providing more than 50%, let's say, of their energy from fossil fuels? If the latter, it means that you may want to think about changing supplier. so that your business can then be associated or aligned with a provider that offers you renewable energy. If you work from home, you're probably using stationery as well as electricity. And if you think about stationery and the amount of paper that you need to store or to buy, you need to be thinking, do I need to print everything? Do I need to store as much, or can I store some of this online? Which then takes away from actually physically buying paper, then having that paper not necessarily sent to a landfill, but maybe reused initially. But at the end, you still would be generating waste, which then has to use carbon to be taken to a place where it is disposed of. Now, the other aspect, if you're selling products as a business that operates online, you could be looking at the packaging that your products are coming in for the reasons I mentioned earlier about how the package would be disposed of. But also, if you're using a single-use material, single-use plastic, for example, as part of your packaging, you can then make a choice as to whether you look for materials that are degradable, biodegradable, and if when disposed of, they will decompose in the environment, or may even be used for compost if you have plants or a garden at home. So you need to be able to think strategically, even though you may say, well, you work from home or you run an online business.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Veronica. And I think you're right. It's about breaking it down and being strategic and looking at them different points there of where you can really make a difference. I've got another question. I've got another question here. It's if I'm an owner or a founder of a service-based business, or I work as a freelance consultant, how is net zero relevant to my business?
For many of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, in terms of your choice of energy or your use of energy, the choice of materials that you make, or whether you can actually design materials that will not be discarded after use. You may also want to be thinking about what are the implications in terms of how you service your customers. So as a freelancer, are you servicing your customers where you need to visit their site every day or regularly, once a week? Or maybe you have particular times when you do need to be there? Or can you actually do some of that work remotely? Because the service that you offer gives you that option. Or you can think then, is it a hybrid model that instead of visiting my client 4 times every month, maybe I can do one site visit and then support that with using technology and working remotely. If you're an employer and you have staff working with you, there are any number of ways in which you can help them and you can take action in terms of reducing your carbon emissions and aiming for that net zero target. You can be thinking, for example, again, about work-life balance and whether they need to travel every day to come to work. You can also be thinking about whether, if you've not yet signed up to a cycle to work scheme, like in the UK, it means you can have that as an option under which you can then provide a loan to your employees so they can get a bike to cycle to work or to buy accessories for their bike. And in the process, you're able as a business to have tax benefits from doing that. So there are any number of ways that you can think creatively of how you as a business owner can be or can contribute and at the same time provide some benefits for your employees.
Again, some great advice there, Veronica. And I've got just one last question for you. I think it's a really good, actually, final closing question. It's what's the benefit of aligning my business activity with the UK government plans for net zero? And also, does net zero targets apply to small businesses in other countries?
In answer to the second part of that question, Emma, yes, it does apply, because when we're talking about climate change and net zero, this is part of a United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on climate change, which has been around for decades, and the commitments that are made, for example, at the Conference of Parties every 5 years on average. In this case, we are having the COP26 in Glasgow in a few weeks. Those commitments are global commitments. Governments sign up to those commitments, so they're not only UK relevant commitments. And before I answer the part in terms of aligning with UK businesses, I think this is a good point to speak about the SME Climate Hub. That is, SME is in small and medium-sized enterprises, Climate Hub, which is a platform that you can sign up to as a business owner, whether you're a sole trader or you have employees that you hire in your business. You can sign up as the first step of your commitment to say, as a business, we committed to taking action. You can go on to write your own policy statement on the environment or sustainability as appropriate. But the smeclimatehub.org/UK is a brilliant place to start. And the SME Climate Hub is actually available to businesses in other parts of the world, but in the UK, we have the one that is specifically with the inclusion of UK. Now, in respect to aligning your business, why is it appropriate and timely to do so? Part of it has to do with legislation that government will need to make, and this is UK government as well as other governments, legislation and changes that will need to be made in terms of commitments. And so changes in law, for example, we have one coming up in a few years, which is around purchase of vehicles that use fossil fuels. So buying a new petrol vehicle or diesel vehicle wouldn't be an option for a small business. In which case, you need to be thinking now: should you choose to buy a vehicle that will take you to about 2030? At which case, the technology may have improved, and you'll have options as to whether it's electric or hydrogen that you choose, or whether you should make that decision now to actually purchase an electric vehicle, as the infrastructure is being built in terms of where you can recharge that vehicle. If, for example, you have staff and teams that will be out on the road. So in terms of legislation as well as procurement, those are certainly valid reasons that make it not only essential, but timely for business owners to pay attention to and act on reducing their carbon emissions and aiming for that net zero. However, I would caution that in aiming for net zero, it should be more around activities that would allow you to reduce your carbon, to activities that would allow for saving or storage of that carbon, rather than activities that are designed primarily to merely offset carbon, where you're saying, oh, I'll buy a tree or I'll plant some trees in order to continue emitting as much carbon as I choose. What you want to do is to be able to rein that in, and only when you cannot find a way of reducing and you cannot find a way of contributing to storage through your activities, then you look to see whether or not there's a need for offsetting. So those are my responses to the questions that you've asked, Emma, and thank you ever so much to be able to share with other small business owners some actions that they can take in order to make that difference and to see the benefits and the competitive advantage of considering net zero in their decision making.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Veronica. We'll also make sure that we put a link on our page there to that resource that you spoke about, the SME climate one. So we'll make sure that that's added. Yep. Brilliant. And thank you.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure to have this conversation with you, Emma.